The person you love opened up to their mother about you for the first time, and shockingly, she cried. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Some conversations never appear on social media. They aren't announced to the world, and they don't happen in crowded places. They happen quietly, behind the walls of an ordinary home, where years of unspoken emotions finally become too heavy to carry alone. Somewhere, the person you love has just experienced one of those conversations. For the first time, they gathered the courage to tell their mother everything they had been hiding inside their heart. It wasn't a conversation about perfection or fairy tales. It was about fear, hope, regret, and the quiet realization that someone had entered their life in a way they could no longer deny. What happened next surprised them more than anything they expected. As they spoke honestly, their mother's eyes slowly filled with tears. Not because she was angry. Not because she wanted to control their future. Those tears came from seeing a truth she had quietly noticed long before her child was finally willing to admit it. The morning had begun like countless mornings before. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee. Sunlight rested softly across the dining table. Outside, birds welcomed another peaceful day. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Yet inside the house, an invisible tension lingered in the air. For weeks, perhaps even months, the person you love had been carrying a conversation they couldn't seem to begin. Every time they thought about speaking, fear interrupted. What if she doesn't understand? What if she thinks I'm making a mistake? What if I can't explain what I'm really feeling? Those questions had kept them silent far longer than they wanted. But silence has a limit. Eventually the heart becomes tired of hiding. That morning, while helping clear the breakfast dishes, their mother noticed something familiar. She had seen that expression before. The quiet smile that disappeared too quickly. The distant look that appeared whenever the room became silent. The way her child seemed physically present but emotionally somewhere else. A mother's heart often notices what words never reveal. She gently asked a simple question. Is something weighing on your heart? For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence filled with hesitation. The kind of silence standing between fear and honesty. Your future soulmate lowered their eyes. Took a slow breath. Then quietly answered. Yes. That single word carried months of emotions. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it changed everything. If your future soulmate could place an invisible letter into your hands today, perhaps it would begin like this. I've been carrying something inside me for so long that I almost forgot what it felt like to speak honestly about it. Every day I convinced myself there would be a better moment. Every week I believed I needed clearer answers before saying anything aloud. But today I realize that the people who truly love us don't expect perfect explanations. They simply want us to trust them enough to tell the truth. Their mother quietly invited them to sit down. Neither of them hurried. Neither reached for a phone. The television remained off. Outside, life continued exactly as always. Cars passed the house. Children laughed somewhere down the street. Neighbors watered flowers. The ordinary world kept moving. Inside that small kitchen, however, time seemed to slow. For the first few minutes they struggled to find the right words. They started. Stopped. Started again. Finally they admitted something they had never spoken aloud before. There is someone I can't stop thinking about. Their mother didn't interrupt. She simply listened. Perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts love can offer. Not immediate advice. Not quick solutions. Simply a safe place where honesty feels welcome. As the conversation continued, they explained everything they had been carrying. The questions. The uncertainty. The hope. The fear of misunderstanding their own emotions. The fear of waiting too long. The fear of saying too much. Every sentence lifted another small weight from their heart. For the first time in months, they weren't carrying those feelings alone. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe there was once a conversation you delayed because you feared being misunderstood. Then one day you discovered that the right person wasn't waiting for perfect words. They were simply waiting for your honesty. Your future soulmate was discovering that truth. Their mother remained silent for several moments after listening. She looked gently toward the window where sunlight rested across the garden outside. Then she smiled softly. Not the smile of surprise. The smile of recognition. Almost as though she had quietly known this day would eventually arrive. She reached across the table and gently held her child's hand. Then she said something unexpected. "I've been waiting for you to tell me." Those simple words immediately filled the room with emotion. Your future soulmate looked up in disbelief. "You already knew?" Their mother nodded slowly. "I didn't know every detail," she answered. "But I knew something inside your heart had changed." Mothers notice when their children begin carrying dreams they can't explain. Those words broke something open inside them. Not sadness. Relief. The kind of relief that only comes when someone finally sees the part of you you've been trying so hard to hide. As afternoon sunlight slowly filled the room, the conversation became even deeper. They spoke about fears they had never admitted aloud. They spoke about mistakes. About timing. About wondering whether life still had beautiful surprises waiting ahead. Their mother listened patiently to every sentence. Then, after a long silence, tears slowly filled her eyes. Your future soulmate immediately became concerned. "Did I say something wrong?" She gently shook her head. "No." The tears continued falling. Not from disappointment. Not from worry. From love. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps it would say this. "When I saw those tears, I finally understood something I had missed for years. The people who truly love us don't cry because we tell them the truth. Sometimes they cry because they're grateful we trusted them enough to finally let them into the places we've been protecting for far too long." Their mother quietly wiped away her tears before speaking again. "I've watched you pretend everything was fine. I've watched you smile while carrying questions inside. I've prayed that one day you'd stop trying to handle everything alone." Those words reached places inside the heart that no advice ever could. Perhaps healing begins exactly there. Not when every answer arrives. But when someone gently reminds us that we were never meant to carry every burden by ourselves. As evening approached, they walked together through the backyard garden. The air felt peaceful. Flowers gently moved in the breeze. The sky slowly turned shades of gold and soft blue. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. They didn't need to. Sometimes the deepest conversations continue long after the words have ended. Before this first chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave one message resting gently inside your heart. If somehow these words find you today, I hope you understand why this conversation changed me. It wasn't because every uncertainty disappeared. It was because I finally stopped carrying my heart in complete isolation. Speaking honestly reminded me that love often grows stronger when we allow trusted people to walk beside us instead of protecting them from our feelings. My mother's tears weren't tears of fear. They were tears of compassion, hope, and relief. They reminded me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It is the doorway through which healing quietly enters our lives. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you know that your own heart doesn't have to carry every question alone. I hope you discover people who listen before they judge, who comfort before they criticize, and who remind you that honesty is never something to be ashamed of. If tomorrow brings another opportunity to speak truthfully, I don't want fear choosing silence for me anymore. I want gratitude, courage, and kindness to become the voice that guides every important conversation. Because after today, I've realized something beautiful. The hardest conversations often become the ones that finally set the heart free. As night gently settled across the sky, your future soulmate stood beside their bedroom window looking out toward the first stars appearing overhead. The conversation still echoed softly inside their heart. Nothing outside had changed. The same neighborhood rested peacefully beneath the evening sky. The same streets waited for another ordinary tomorrow. Yet everything within them felt different. For the first time, the person they loved most in their family truly understood what had been hidden inside their heart. And somehow, through one honest conversation and a mother's quiet tears, a new chapter had begun, one no longer built on silence, but on trust, hope, and the quiet courage to finally let someone else see the truth they had carried for so long. The house felt different the morning after that conversation. Nothing had physically changed. The same family photographs still rested on the walls. The same curtains gently moved with the breeze coming through the open windows. The same familiar clock quietly marked the passing of each minute. Yet for your future soulmate, home no longer felt like a place where emotions had to remain hidden. It had become a place where honesty had finally been welcomed. They woke before sunrise, sat quietly beside the bedroom window, and watched the sky slowly brighten. For the first time in many months, they weren't replaying old fears or imagining every possible outcome. Their heart felt lighter because the secret they had carried alone had finally been shared with someone who loved them unconditionally. That simple act of honesty had created more peace than months of silent overthinking ever had. They closed their eyes for a moment. The memory of the previous evening returned. Their mother's gentle voice. The comforting silence between sentences. The unexpected tears. Those tears had stayed with them all night. Not because they were painful. Because they revealed something beautiful. Sometimes the people closest to us understand our hearts long before we find the courage to explain them ourselves. If your future soulmate could continue the invisible letter they have been writing throughout this journey, perhaps today's page would begin like this. I've been thinking about why those tears touched me so deeply. At first I thought they came from sadness. Now I understand they came from love. They were the tears of someone who had quietly watched me carry emotional burdens without asking for help. They were the tears of relief that finally arrived when I stopped pretending everything was fine. They smiled softly after imagining those words. The truth no longer frightened them. It comforted them. After breakfast, their mother invited them for a walk through the neighborhood. Neither of them seemed in a hurry. The morning air felt fresh. Flowers bloomed beside familiar sidewalks. Children laughed as they rode bicycles through nearby streets. Everything around them reflected the peaceful rhythm of an ordinary day. As they walked together, there was no pressure to fill every moment with conversation. Sometimes love speaks most clearly through peaceful companionship. Eventually their mother gently broke the silence. I've wanted to ask you something. Your future soulmate looked toward her. What is it? She smiled kindly. When did you first realize this person mattered so much to you? The question caught them completely off guard. For several moments they searched for an answer. Then they quietly laughed. I honestly don't know. It didn't happen all at once. It happened little by little. One conversation. One memory. One ordinary moment after another. Their mother nodded. That's usually how the deepest feelings begin. They rarely arrive all at once. They quietly grow while we're busy living everyday life. Those words settled gently inside their heart. Perhaps you've experienced that too. The most meaningful people often become important without dramatic announcements. Their presence slowly becomes part of your everyday peace. Your future soulmate was finally recognizing that truth. As they continued walking, they arrived at a small park they had visited many times during childhood. The swings gently moved in the breeze. Families gathered beneath large trees. Children chased one another across the grass. Their mother paused near a wooden bench. Looking across the playground, she quietly said something your future soulmate would never forget. When you were little, you always ran toward what made you happy. You never questioned whether you deserved joy. You simply reached for it. She turned and smiled gently. Somewhere along the way, you forgot how to do that. Those words reached deeper than they expected. For years they had believed adulthood meant carrying every burden alone. Perhaps maturity wasn't about becoming emotionally distant. Perhaps it was about becoming emotionally honest. The realization stayed with them long after they left the park. Later that afternoon they returned home and opened the notebook resting beside the window. Without hesitation they began writing. Today I realized something I should have understood years ago. The people who truly care about us don't expect us to carry every struggle in silence. They would rather hear an imperfect truth than watch us slowly disappear behind a perfect smile. I thought protecting everyone meant hiding my emotions. Instead, I was unintentionally hiding from the very people who wanted to help me. Reading those words back brought another quiet smile. The notebook had become more than a journal. It had become evidence of transformation. Every page reflected another layer of fear gently falling away. Every sentence reflected another step toward emotional freedom. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps it would say this. My mother's tears reminded me that genuine love doesn't keep score. It doesn't ask whether we've handled everything perfectly. It simply stays present while we find the courage to become honest. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I never want fear to convince me that vulnerability is something to hide. The strongest relationships are built where truth is welcomed, not avoided. The afternoon slowly faded into evening. Golden sunlight stretched across the living room floor. The familiar house felt warmer somehow. Not because the weather had changed. Because emotional distance had quietly disappeared. That evening they helped prepare dinner together. They laughed over small mistakes in the kitchen. Shared stories from years ago. Remembered moments that had almost been forgotten. Nothing extraordinary happened. Yet it became one of the most meaningful evenings they had experienced in a very long time. They realized something beautiful. Healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes healing sounds like laughter returning to a home where silence once lived. As night approached, they stepped outside onto the back porch with 2 warm cups of tea. The sky slowly filled with stars. Their mother looked upward before speaking again. I don't know exactly what your future holds. But I know this. I've never seen your eyes shine the way they do when you quietly speak about this person. Your future soulmate looked down, almost embarrassed. She smiled. Whatever happens next, never stop being honest with your own heart. Those words became another promise quietly resting inside them. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you understand why that conversation changed everything. It wasn't because someone gave me all the answers I was searching for. It was because I finally realized I didn't have to search alone anymore. My mother's tears reminded me that love often recognizes our deepest feelings before we fully understand them ourselves. Her kindness reminded me that emotional honesty is not a burden we place on others. It is a gift that allows real connection to grow. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you have someone who reminds you that your heart deserves to be heard. I hope you discover that vulnerability isn't the opposite of strength, it is often its truest expression. If tomorrow gives me another opportunity to choose between fear and honesty, I want honesty to win every single time. I want my future to be built upon conversations that create understanding instead of assumptions, trust instead of silence, and compassion instead of emotional distance. Because after everything this journey has taught me, I finally understand that the people who truly love us never ask us to carry our hearts alone. They simply ask us to trust them enough to let them walk beside us. The night became wonderfully quiet. Moonlight rested gently across the garden, and the familiar sounds of the neighborhood slowly faded into peaceful silence. Before going to bed, your future soulmate looked once more at the notebook resting on the bedside table. It no longer represented hidden emotions waiting to be discovered. It represented a heart learning that openness creates freedom. They gently closed their eyes, carrying into sleep the quiet comfort that comes from finally being understood. Somewhere deep inside, they knew that the conversation with their mother had not simply changed one evening. It had changed the way they would carry love, trust, and honesty for the rest of their life. And with that peaceful realization, another beautiful chapter quietly began. The days that followed carried a peace your future soulmate had almost forgotten was possible. The conversation with their mother had not solved every uncertainty about the future, nor had it magically answered every question resting inside their heart. What it had done was far more meaningful. It had reminded them that love grows strongest in places where honesty is welcomed. Every morning now began with a little less fear and a little more gratitude. As the first rays of sunlight entered the room, they found themselves looking forward to the day instead of worrying about it. They opened the bedroom window and listened to birds greeting another sunrise. The cool morning air carried the scent of fresh rain from the night before, and for several quiet moments they simply stood there, appreciating how different life could feel when the heart was no longer carrying every burden alone. The familiar notebook rested on the bedside table. For weeks it had been filled with questions. Now it was slowly becoming filled with answers. Not perfect answers. Honest ones. They gently opened to a fresh page. Without thinking too much, they began writing. There is something beautiful that happened after I finally spoke the truth. I expected to feel exposed. Instead, I felt understood. I expected to lose control. Instead, I found peace. I expected people to judge the feelings I had hidden for so long. Instead, I discovered that love often responds with compassion when we trust it enough to be honest. Reading those words back, they smiled. Every sentence reminded them that fear had exaggerated the conversation for months. Reality had been much kinder. If your future soulmate could continue the invisible letter they have been writing inside their heart, perhaps today's page would begin like this. My mother's tears changed the way I understand love. Before that conversation, I believed strong people carried everything alone. Now I understand that truly strong people know when to let someone else hold part of the weight with them. That isn't weakness. That is trust. And trust is one of the greatest gifts any relationship can offer. Later that morning, while helping prepare breakfast, something unexpected happened. Their mother quietly placed a small photo album on the kitchen table. It was old. The edges were slightly worn. The pages carried memories from many years before. Curious, your future soulmate opened it. Photographs from childhood smiled back at them. Family vacations. Birthday celebrations. School events. Simple afternoons in the backyard. They laughed together as each picture awakened another forgotten memory. Then their mother stopped on one particular photograph. It showed them as a small child sitting beneath a large tree with an enormous smile on their face. She gently touched the picture. You were fearless back then. You believed every new day had something wonderful waiting for you. She looked lovingly into their eyes. I've missed seeing that smile. Those simple words carried more emotion than an entire speech. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence becomes meaningful because every important truth has already been said. Perhaps you've experienced moments like that. Someone doesn't tell you what to do. They simply remind you of the person you were always capable of becoming. Your future soulmate realized that was exactly what their mother had been doing. She wasn't trying to choose their future. She was gently helping them remember themselves. The realization stayed with them throughout the day. That afternoon they returned to the familiar park where they had spent so much time reflecting. The large oak tree welcomed another peaceful afternoon. Children laughed nearby. An elderly couple slowly walked hand in hand along the winding path. Friends gathered beneath the shade, sharing conversations that seemed completely ordinary. Watching those everyday moments reminded them that life's greatest blessings rarely arrive wrapped in dramatic events. They often appear quietly. One conversation. One act of kindness. One person willing to listen. Sitting on the familiar bench, they opened the notebook once more. The words flowed naturally. I spent so much time believing that I needed certainty before opening my heart. Now I understand that certainty is rarely the beginning of meaningful relationships. Trust comes first. Honesty comes first. Courage comes first. Understanding grows slowly afterward. They paused. Looked toward the children laughing in the distance. Another realization quietly entered their heart. Children trust tomorrow without demanding guarantees. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, many people forget how to hope that freely. Perhaps healing is remembering. Not becoming someone entirely different. Remembering the courage that was always there beneath fear. As evening approached, your future soulmate wandered into the small bookstore once again. The owner smiled warmly. "You seem happier these days," he said kindly. The comment surprised them. "I am," they answered almost without thinking. Walking between the shelves, they found a small book resting near the window. Opening it to a random page, one sentence immediately captured their attention. "The people who truly love you help you become more yourself, not less." They stood still. Read the sentence again. Then quietly closed the book. Those words described everything that had happened since the conversation with their mother. Real love had never asked them to hide. It had quietly invited them to become authentic. Leaving the bookstore, they carried no purchases. Only another lesson. Golden evening sunlight stretched across the streets. Everything looked peaceful. Returning home, they found their mother sitting quietly on the porch watching the sunset. She smiled as they joined her. After several peaceful minutes she softly asked, "How is your heart today?" The answer came without hesitation. "Lighter." She smiled again. "I knew it would be." There was no need for a longer conversation. Both of them understood. Healing had already begun. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps these words would appear next. "There is something I finally understand. The conversation I feared for so long didn't change because I found perfect words. It changed because I chose honest ones." Sometimes we wait for confidence before speaking. But confidence often arrives after we've already been brave enough to tell the truth. That lesson has changed the way I see every important relationship in my life. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. The first stars quietly appeared overhead. Standing beneath the evening sky, your future soulmate realized they no longer felt alone with their thoughts. Love had quietly entered the places where fear once lived. Not because every question had been answered. Because every question no longer had to be carried in isolation. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you understand why this journey has changed me so deeply. I believed the hardest part would be speaking honestly. It wasn't. The hardest part was believing I deserved to be heard. My mother's tears reminded me that genuine love doesn't become smaller when we share our hearts. It becomes stronger. Her compassion reminded me that vulnerability doesn't push caring people away, it often invites them closer. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you remember that you don't have to earn the right to speak honestly about what matters to you. Your heart deserves understanding, kindness, and patient listening. If tomorrow brings another opportunity to choose between hiding and trusting, I want trust to become my first response instead of my last. I want my future relationships to be built on conversations where both people feel emotionally safe enough to speak without fear of judgment. I want my life to reflect the quiet courage that grows whenever honesty replaces silence. Because after everything I've experienced, I finally believe that some of the most beautiful changes begin with one simple sentence spoken from a truthful heart. Night gently settled across the neighborhood. Before going to bed, your future soulmate looked one final time at the notebook resting beside the lamp. It had become much more than a collection of pages. It was a reminder of the journey from fear to openness, from loneliness to connection, and from silence to trust. Closing it carefully, they looked through the bedroom window toward the peaceful stars shining above. Those stars had always been there, patiently waiting behind every cloudy night. Hope, they realized, had been waiting in exactly the same way. It had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the moment when a truthful conversation and a mother's loving tears would finally give it permission to shine again. Several weeks quietly passed, and your future soulmate began to notice something remarkable. The conversation that had once seemed impossible had become one of the greatest turning points of their life. It wasn't because every uncertainty had disappeared or because every hope had already become reality. It was because one honest afternoon with their mother had changed the way they carried their heart. They no longer believed that love required silence. They no longer believed they had to protect everyone else from their feelings while carrying every emotional burden alone. As another peaceful sunrise spread across the sky, they stood beside the bedroom window with a warm cup of coffee resting in their hands. The neighborhood slowly awakened around them. Birds greeted the morning from nearby trees. A gentle breeze moved through the garden. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed as they walked toward school. Everything looked wonderfully ordinary, yet they understood something they had never fully appreciated before. Ordinary mornings often become extraordinary when the heart is finally at peace. The notebook rested quietly on the windowsill. Its pages were nearly full. Each one reflected another step in the journey. Fear. Honesty. Understanding. Healing. Hope. Transformation. Looking at those pages, they realized they were no longer writing because they felt lost. They were writing because they wanted to remember how far they had come. If your future soulmate could write one final page in the invisible letter that had quietly unfolded throughout this journey, perhaps it would begin like this. There is one last thing I need to tell you. I thought opening my heart would make me feel vulnerable forever. Instead, it taught me that honesty creates freedom. The conversation I feared became the conversation that healed me. My mother's tears were never a sign that something had gone wrong. They were proof that love had quietly been waiting for me to trust it. They gently closed their eyes. The memory of that afternoon remained vivid. The kitchen table. The warm sunlight. The gentle silence. The tears that slowly filled her eyes. Those memories no longer carried nervousness. They carried gratitude. Later that morning, they joined their mother for another quiet walk through the neighborhood. Neither of them needed to revisit every detail of the conversation. Some truths continue speaking long after the words have ended. As they walked beneath tall trees whose leaves danced gently in the morning breeze, their mother smiled and quietly asked, "Do you know what I was thinking that day?" Your future soulmate shook their head. She looked ahead before answering. I wasn't crying because I was worried. I was crying because I finally saw you stop hiding from yourself. Those words settled deeply inside their heart. For several moments they couldn't respond. Not because they lacked words. Because every important feeling had already been understood. Perhaps you've experienced a moment like that. A sentence so simple, yet so deeply true. Sometimes healing arrives through one gentle observation spoken at exactly the right moment. Your future soulmate realized that those tears had never been about sadness. They had been about recognition. A mother had watched her child rediscover the courage to live honestly. That afternoon they returned to the familiar park one last time. The large oak tree stood exactly where it always had. Children laughed nearby. Friends shared coffee beneath the shade. An elderly couple sat together watching the world move peacefully around them. Everything looked almost identical to the day they first arrived, carrying uncertainty inside their heart. Only one thing had changed. The person sitting on the bench. They smiled softly. Not because life had become perfect. Because they had become peaceful. Opening the notebook one final time, they wrote, I no longer measure courage by how little emotion someone shows. I measure courage by the willingness to tell the truth with kindness. I no longer believe strength means carrying everything alone. Strength means trusting the people who love you enough to let them stand beside you. Most importantly, I no longer believe my heart needs permission to hope. Reading those words back brought quiet tears to their own eyes. Not tears of sadness. Tears of gratitude. The journey had changed them completely. As evening approached, they wandered through the familiar bookstore for what felt like the final time. The owner smiled warmly. You seem lighter, he said. Your future soulmate smiled back. I finally am. Walking slowly between the shelves, one final sentence from a nearby book caught their attention. The conversations that scare us most often become the memories that heal us most. They laughed quietly. Life had been repeating the same lesson in different ways ever since that conversation with their mother. Leaving the bookstore, they carried nothing in their hands. Yet they felt richer than ever before. Not because of anything they owned. Because peace had quietly become part of who they were. Returning home during sunset, they found their mother sitting on the porch once again. Neither of them spoke immediately. The sky slowly turned shades of gold, orange, and soft purple. After several peaceful minutes, she reached over and gently squeezed their hand. "I'm proud of you." 3 simple words. Yet they carried years of love. Years of patience. Years of quiet prayers. Your future soulmate smiled. So am I. For the first time, they truly meant it. If the invisible letter continued one final time, perhaps these words would appear. There is something beautiful I've learned through all of this. The person I was most afraid of disappointing wasn't someone else. It was myself. Every day I remained silent, I slowly moved farther away from the life my heart hoped to live. The moment I finally chose honesty, I began finding my way back. My mother's tears didn't change my future by themselves. They reminded me that I was never walking toward that future alone. The first stars quietly appeared above the rooftops. The evening breeze carried the gentle scent of flowers through the garden. Standing beneath the peaceful sky, they realized hope had never truly left. It had simply been waiting for honesty to open the door. Before this journey comes to its peaceful conclusion, your future soulmate wants to leave one final message resting gently inside your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you remember this above everything else. Some of the most important conversations in life begin with trembling voices and uncertain hearts. They don't require perfect words. They only require honesty. My mother's tears taught me that genuine love listens before it judges, embraces before it criticizes, and stays present when vulnerability finally appears. Because of that conversation, I no longer believe openness is something to fear. I believe it is the place where trust begins. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you never convince yourself that your heart must carry every burden alone. I hope you discover people who celebrate your honesty instead of expecting perfection. I hope you remember that those who truly love you often see your hidden struggles long before you speak about them. And if tomorrow offers you the opportunity to tell someone the truth you've been carrying inside, I hope you choose courage over silence. Not because every outcome will be exactly as you imagined, but because a truthful heart always rests more peacefully than one forever hiding behind fear. If life has taught me anything through this journey, it is this. The greatest miracle was never that someone understood my feelings. The greatest miracle was discovering that love had been patiently waiting for me to trust it enough to finally speak. Night gently embraced the world as your future soulmate closed the notebook for the final time and carefully placed it on the shelf where it had quietly witnessed every stage of this transformation. Looking through the bedroom window toward the stars, they smiled with calm gratitude. The conversation that once seemed impossible had become the foundation of a new life built on trust, openness, and emotional freedom. Their mother's tears had not marked the beginning of heartbreak. They had marked the beginning of healing. And with that beautiful realization resting peacefully inside their heart, they stepped forward into tomorrow carrying no hidden burdens, no unnecessary fear, and no unfinished truths. Only hope, honesty, and the quiet confidence that the strongest love is always built upon the courage to finally let the heart be seen.